But I will say I enjoyed every minute of it. I mean, that's why I'm still doing it. And the people part of it, interviewing people, some in tough situations, some a lot in celebration. One of my other theories was always treat, and I saw this from a movie, and it worked throughout broadcast when I've had to deal with people, treat the regular guy like a famous person or a star, and treat the star or the famous person like a regular guy. And that way you're not intimidated by anybody, but you also, you don't overlook anybody or miss someone who's interesting or has a story to tell, whether it's in interviews or in reporting. So that's kind of something that I lived by. And I think that's gotten me through no matter what sport I was covering or what situation.
He is the author of That Deserves a Wow, Untold Stories of Legends and Champions, Their Wins and Heartbreaks. Emmy Award-winning broadcaster Chris Myers reflects on his illustrious career in sports, which is available now. We have the pleasure in welcoming Chris Myers onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Justin. It's good to be on with you. Thanks for inviting me.
It is an honor to have you on our podcast. Before we delve into the book, we have a tradition on our show. We are a basketball podcast after all, and we ask all of our guests this question. Take it any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
Wow. Okay. I think my first was in South Florida before there was an NBA team there as a kid, hearing about the Lakers, and they weren't quite Showtime then. That's kind of a personal memory, but that's what kind of brought me into basketball. And later, Magic Johnson going up against Dr. J and the Sixers. But the Lakers, and I think it was that 33-game win streak, which was stopped by Lou Alcindor and the Milwaukee Bucks, ironically, who later would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and play for the Lakers. So that kind of stirred my earliest fascination with at least the NBA and pro hoops. And ever since then, even though I grew up in South Florida, I was a Laker fan, and then have had opportunities to interview people like Kobe Bryant and Wilt Chamberlain, along with Charles Barkley and Michael Jordan along the way. But Oscar Robertson, I mean, you go back historically, some of the great names. But I think my favorite memory, just as a fan, before I ever thought I could do this, was the Lakers, and then enjoying Showtime later with Magic and James Worthy and the great Celtic-Laker rivalries.
So when you're putting together this book, what is your thought process and just compiling? I'm sure you have legendary memories, just all your experiences. What's kind of the blueprint and just compiling all this information into a book that's going to be sold? What is that creative process like?
Yeah, that was a little bit of a challenge, and I really didn't write I mean, I always wrote for TV or radio, so I wasn't necessarily a book writer. I had some help, Travis Thrasher, who is someone who does a lot of writing. He was a research kind of framer for me. It's to listen to my stories and say, okay, people, I think they're going to be interested more in this, and they're going to want to hear more from this guy and these stories. So how we shape them, and I think the HarperCollins, when they wanted me to put the book together, wanted a little bit of my perspective. I didn't want it just to be all about me, but I wanted it to be some great interviews with people and sports happenings, wow moments in sports through my eyes. Since I was really fortunate enough to start as a teenager, to start with an interview with Muhammad Ali as as one of my first interviews, and then go on with a decade at ESPN and then 20 plus years at Fox, and some of the experiences that I had. So that was the hard part, is putting it all in a 300-page book that was, comfortable to read, but interesting for people. And you may have heard the names before, but some of the stories you may have heard about, an O.J. Simpson interview, the first live interview, but you didn't know a lot about what went on behind the scenes or why I was in the situation I was in, being at the Earthquake World Series, some of these sporting events that became major, news events because of what happened, the Olympic bombing in Atlanta, et cetera. So that was really, shaping and making that comfortable. And it wasn't all chronological, but it's more a lot about life and death in sports and in the real world that we live in. I mean, living your life and dealing with some difficult moments.
What is the thought process when a breaking news story is happening in real time, when something is within the sports world, but it crosses over into the news world, which naturally has a bigger audience? So what is your thought process for the viewer? It's like you're seeing it for the first time, you're ingesting the information, but for you, what is the thought process in terms of making sure that all the information you have is correct? Are you reacting in real time? And what has that process evolved just through with technology and with social media? Has that
Yeah, and
changed?
Yeah, that's really evolved. And I mean, had I had a cell phone or texting when I was at some of these events, that would have changed things dramatically. But I think you hit on it, the information that you're there to you prepare for a sporting event, and then all of a sudden something else happens. Earthquake World Series, as I mentioned, or Dale Earnhardt. We're there to cover the race, and he hits the wall at the Daytona 500, and he's they wouldn't announce he was dead, but we thought he was, so we had to cover those guys. So right away, you kick into kind of old school reporter journalism. What kind of information? A lot of this is why sports is so much fun. Normally, is because you're covering games. It's live. It's interaction, and it's a real high wire act. So when news happens, you kick in your normal kind of instinctive journalistic skills. Okay, what do people need to know at home, and how can I gather the information, and how can I get it to them quickly, but making sure that it's accurate. Those are the kinds of challenges that you have, and you know how to do that when you're doing a sporting event because that's why you're there. But when something else takes place, then you're dealing often with law enforcement or medical people or politicians or that type of thing, and so you have to go to the right people, just like you would if you were at a sporting event. So I think sports broadcasting is very much live and reactionary, despite preparation going into a game. What I call a football game, we think it's going to go one way, but we have to be prepared when a game goes a different way, or the backup quarterback comes in and the game changes. So that's kind of how the news event is. The important thing too is staying cool under pressure and on your feet when the camera's on. You can't rattle off too much information at one time. People won't grasp that. And to really describe the scene and set the atmosphere, give them a feel of, for example, when the bomb went off at the Olympics in Atlanta, we thought there were more bombs, and we there were police looking, and there's this fear within the Olympic Village and in the area that for the residents, and so at the time you don't want to panic people, but you want to say, hey, this is what the police or the authorities are doing. Bomb squad called in, and this is what has happened so far.
Can you describe how the art of sports broadcasting has evolved over time through your career, just through technology? Is your interaction with fans the same when you first started? Is it different just in terms of either positive or negative feedback that you get, and just your relationships, just what you have with the viewers at home? What is that experience like? Do you think it has it evolved, or do you think we hear a lot of negative things about social media? Do you think it's kind of degraded just through because of social media? Like, kind of you're a legend in the industry compared to like myself, who's I'm just a fan and just love sports. So I'm just curious from your perspective, just through the evolution of technology, do you think that's kind of hurt just kind of the way the fans understand how these broadcasts are being made? I mean, I'm a media nerd. I love just anchors and just the evolution of sports broadcasting, but I realize I'm in the minority. Your casual viewer just wants to watch the game and have a beer. So the viewer
Yeah.
yourself, what is kind of your relationship with the viewer been like over your career?
Well, it used to be, I mean, when I did talk radio, you could get feedback. People could call in and say, hey, I like your interview, or I disagree with you, or, boy, you don't talk enough about this sport or what. So that was one thing other than, people sending letters to TV stations. But that is one of the good things with social media and I do take it seriously if somebody is speaking from the heart. In other words, if they point out something that I didn't do in a broadcast, or they'd like to see more of it, it makes sense. Well, I'll listen to that. But if they're just going to be angry because they lost a bet, or because, which we get a lot of, I called a game and their team was on the losing end and they thought I was biased for the other team. You get a lot of that. So they're just angry. And I get that too. People are betting on it. I was a fan at heart, and that part will never leave me. But that does attach you more because you can read and get a sense of not only what fans are saying, but what players and coaches and what if they're going to be on social media, how they feel about certain things, and you can use a lot of that information. It's very valuable. I think in terms of sportscasting, how it's changed a lot. I was always brought up in terms of give that information. The game is the thing; they're the stars. The interview, they're the star. In other words, I'm not an actor, a comedian, a performer. They'd have to have a little bit of that to keep things going sometimes. But now it seems that it's a lot of let's make a headline. People want to be more interesting than they want to be accurate. And that's kind of a little bit of a shallow thing for me. You can be both. I think you can be interesting and you can be accurate. You can have opinions and be provocative without being rude or insensitive or uninformed. And that's the other thing. Some people have to, in the business, have to comment on everything, and that's okay. But just know that they're not as informed on everything. I mean, their wheelhouse might be the NBA or the NFL, but they're talking about soccer as if they were some kind of expert. And I think it's up to us, meaning fans or viewers or readers, social media. We have to differentiate what the reporting is and the calling the game versus what somebody is who's got their own act and is doing their own kind of show, which is okay to have those shows. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying there's more of that. And I think people seem to be attracted to that, at least at this current time.
Do you have a favorite sport that you prefer covering? Or do you kind of treat them all equally, or do you get more excited when you get an assignment that is catered to your own personal preference?
Yeah, I get excited. Certain people, I mean, excited when I get to interview them. But in the book, that deserves a while. I talk a little bit about it. It's a slogan of mine that I, applied to myself at an early age, and that was every night's the Super Bowl. People would tease me, my own family, like, "Come on, Chris, you got every day's not the Super Bowl." But I would treat at least the job assignment, whether I was doing covering a high school football game for the local channel in Miami, or I was calling an NFL game or reporting on the Super Bowl with the Patriots trying to go the perfect season against the Giants. So and that always, whatever sport I covered, that's what I like about covering and this business. You can do a lot of different sports. I always want to appreciate, because to the people watching and the people participating in that sport, it is important to them. It's big enough to be their Super Bowl, so to speak. So that's how I approach it, so that I stay fresh and that I do the right work, and I think treat it the right way. And I think that's an important part of what has kept me going. And then I guess the NFL. I mean, I love all sports because I really am interested in the people part of it to start, and then the actual sports and the technical part. But I think the NFL is probably, football in general is probably what my first passion was and will always be. And that's why the every night the Super Bowl slogan kind of came from that.
Do you have a favorite? I know this might be an impossible question to ask you, but do you have a favorite NFL moment? If you can just pin it down for
Yeah,
one.
I do, and I talk about a few in the book. I mean, I was there when Mahomes and Andy Reid won their first Super Bowl together. I was the field reporter for Fox
Yeah.
on the Super Bowl broadcast when they came back and beat the 49ers in that run. And it was special because you get to interview them right away, and the emotion, and Andy Reid's first Super Bowl for him, and the idea that, wow, that led to what is a dynasty now, in terms of what they've become. And they were good, which was amazing. But probably my favorite was Tom Brady and the Patriots when they came back. I was on their sideline for the Super Bowl broadcast on Fox when they trailed Atlanta 28-3, and so I was. Belichick at halftime wasn't very happy. Obviously, I watched how the team handled, and some of it we could show on camera and talk about. But Brady and the Falcons cooperated after the New England put pressure on it, but led that amazing comeback on the overtime, and then got to go rush through the crowd in the first overtime Super Bowl and interview him moments after, just minutes after. He was exhausted, but pulled that off, and it was a big year for him because previously there was Deflategate and some illness in the family. So this was a very emotional and an outstanding game to be a part of, or to broadcast, have a hand in it, in a sense. So that's kind of a favorite moment in terms of one of many, but that one stands out because of the magnitude and who it was and how it happened.
Shifting gears, what is your philosophy on players that have crossed over into the media world and displaying their opinion and kind of walking down line in terms of being honest and being authentic, but not also harming the league? I ask this just because, I watch Inside the NBA. I think it's a fantastic show. And a lot of people criticize Barkley for his opinions on different stuff happening to the league. He's very honest. If he says a game is boring, he'll say it's boring. He's not there to promote, the NBA on TNT. He's there to give his opinions. What is your philosophy on that? Do you think the athletes should be working on behalf of the league, or should they be giving their opinions and being their authentic selves?
Yeah, well, I think that's up to the person and the broadcasters to determine that. But I think if you know you have a personality like Charles Barkley, you know what you're getting, right? I mean, he's gonna. And I saw this. I interviewed him on the Up Close show, and there's some stories in the book, some fun ones, and a sensitive side of Charles, a caring side, which I think people would appreciate. But you could tell as a player, he was quotable and he was honest and candid. And sometimes that upset whether it's teammates, coaches, or the opposition. or other people. But you could see that if he wanted to do this, the broadcast stuff, he would be good at it. And he's become a megastar just for what you said. And I'll tell you though, he doesn't do it for effect. Charles Barkley does it because that's how he feels, and he's authentic. And I think that's what matters. There's other people, and I'm not going to judge other analysts or even people that aren't ex-players that say a lot of things and try to be theatrical and don't really mean it, but just because they want to get a reaction. He believes the thing, and we've become good friends. Him and I disagree on a lot of things. I'm like, how could you say that? But that's okay. So yeah, and I think that's what they want, or you should want that if you're going to hire Charles Barkley. There are others that they say, hey, we really need you to sell the product. You don't have to be dishonest about it if something happens in the game, but you don't have to be as outspoken about whether you like it or not. Just kind of call the action or talk about the games and the players involved. So that usually is sorted out when people hire people.
What is your opinions of athletes, starting their own podcast, creating their own brand, before kind of this new media rise? The only opportunity for an athlete was to, either, get on, be a member of a inside the NBA type of show. But now they're controlling their own brand. I think Pat McAfee has led that charge. There's certainly others following in his footsteps. Kind of, what's your opinion on kind of athletes diversifying kind of their media portfolio nowadays?
Yeah, what the Manning, Peyton Manning, the Manning brothers have done with the Manning cast, and there are a lot of examples that may not be on a grand scale of television, but like you said, podcasts, radio shows. I think it's great, and I think for social media too. I think we get to know more about players. It gives more of them an opportunity. There's only so many jobs out there, but if somebody's working hard, and they obviously, even when I'm calling a game or broadcasting, I can give my opinion and the research and all that, but the guy who played the game, you really want that insight, and so they have that advantage, and we have seen many people transfer over into, if they work at it. And that's the thing. Some of them don't put the time and the energy in. It's about speaking at the right time, delivering. Obviously, you know what's going on, but where you fit it in, it's so difficult to do that in a, I think, accepting way. And there's different styles. Some people like a lot of personality. Some like matter of fact. And some people just make up a decision when there's an analyst. I don't like him because of who he played for. But back to your original point, I think it is great because we also know whether athletes can say things, even if they don't want to do their own show, they can comment on social media and give what they think really happened, their side of an issue. And whereas before they had to go through a newspaper writer or a broadcaster to express that and at least have a lot of people see it or hear it.
What is one of the most heartbreaking moments you've seen on the field? And I'm just thinking, even maybe off the field, especially what happened recently with the Luka Anthony Davis trade. A lot of fans certainly upset in Dallas about what happened. Has there been anything kind of like that's been unexpected that you might be either you have to cover kind of last minute that kind of equates to what happened we saw in the basketball world? There was such a shocking moment. And, it could be heartbreaking for a Maverick stance, depending how things play out.
Yeah.
Is there anything that equates to what happened recently, you think?
Yeah, I mean, a trade like that, I mean, that was jolting, and that was like, also, you're like, wow, did Dallas really do that? Give up a guy who's the top 5 scorer? I mean, we know Anthony Davis is a good player, but boy, you could have got a lot more. And we know where their team is, but and for the Lakers, it looks like a steal, and the future without LeBron. So, but yeah, going beyond that, I was doing Sports Center when the news broke with, and I don't know if it was Mike Tirico or who I was, Linda Cohn, who I was on with, that Magic Johnson had this big announcement, and the AIDS came out. This is way back, and so having to scramble and cover that was shocking, upsetting, but we had to get on the air and report it nationally. And I also, as a reporter, was covering the Loyola Marymount. So it was going on, their tournament, and I was called in when Hank Gathers, who was going to be a first-round draft pick, the 19-year-old for LMU, that kind of run and gun shoot offense, that crazy Paul West said they made a great run in the tournament, but he suffered a heart attack on the court and had to be rushed to a hospital. And I had to go there and report on that. And his family was there, and he ended up passing away. And then he was going to be, probably a very high first round pick. And so that was it, to report that to an audience, to deal with that. I mean, those are moments that really stick with you. And then even if you go through your own personal loss at times, you think about that and what the family went through. So those were a couple of things that I think stood out about dealing with a tough situation involving a player.
Can you talk about what's happening now within sports media? Just, the rise of sports betting, artificial intelligence, streaming. If there's anything that kind of catches your eye, either positively or negatively, you think
Yeah,
that
I think it's no, and I think it's great that there's a lot of information out there. The problem is we have to decipher it and what's accurate. And look, news is going through the same thing. I mean, talking about either misinformation or bad information, and who should be editing or policing. I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think it's important to, if you're gonna have a strong opinion or say certain things, you need to identify yourself. You can't be a kangaroo from wherever. You got to give your real name and be a real person, so that people will have, if you're going to say something, then they'll be able to see the real person and talk to them. And I think it's up to us. I think for companies, I think it's important to distinguish, hey, this person is reporting sports or reporting facts. And this is be like they used to have a newspaper business. This guy's a columnist. He's an opinion guy, so he's gonna give his point of view and his opinion of things. And if the facts may be a little bit different than what you're seeing by the reporter, but I think you need to help point that out, especially for younger people who live on their phones. I'm just as guilty with scrolling and all the different choices you have. And it's up to us when we look to where's this coming from, and how accurate is this person? Is this somebody who does this for a living? Is this somebody who has access to the story or the information? Or is this just somebody either clowning around or a negative, or trying to stir up a rumor about something and has no real attachment? And that's the hard part. You have to really be able to differentiate.
with your book, once it was completed, was there anything that surprised you that when you originally started putting it together that you, you didn't realize going in once the finished product was finished?
Yeah, I don't know about surprised, but I was again. They contacted me to put this together when I started going through. What players always say this through their career, and I kind of laugh at them like, "Oh, that's cliche." But I started at a young age, and then and then it was a local TV, and went to ESPN, as I said, then and to Fox. I did some radio, and I covered all these different sports and then different kinds of events, and interviewed such really cool people from some of the greats of all time in every sport, and then some of those live moments that I was telling you about. And I just when they said, "Hey, we love you to tell all these stories," I kind of lost track of all of those. So when I was going back through it, I needed help in terms of. I was here and did this, and then they would have to, thankfully, if there was video or audio, to pull that story up so I could accurately recall. Memory gets a little fuzzy on some of these things, I could actually recall what I said in that certain moment when I interviewed, this particular player or that particular guy. And so that was, I don't know if it was surprising, but it was like a lot. I mean, and you don't, I didn't stop to think about it because I was on to the next job or the next sport. But I will say I enjoyed every minute of it. I mean, that's why I'm still doing it. And the people part of it, interviewing people, some in tough situations, some a lot in celebration. But one of my other theories was always treat, and I saw this from a movie, and it worked throughout broadcast when I've had to deal with people. Treat the regular guy like a famous person or a star, and treat the star or the famous person like a regular guy. And that way you're not intimidated by anybody, but you also, you don't overlook anybody or miss someone who's interesting or has a story to tell, and whether it's in interviews or in reporting. So that's kind of something that I live by, and I think that's gotten me through no matter what sport I was covering or what situation.
That's great advice. Would you give any advice for, other aspiring journalists that are looking to get in the industry, especially compared to now's new media environment? Is there anything else you think, especially, creating their own podcast, owning their own content compared to maybe 20 years ago where that wasn't really possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity, and now obviously every team has websites that you can work for or contribute to if you want to break through. I always still think an internship, if you are going to college through high school or or college, an internship with either a network or a team where you get to do the actual or follow or help or observe someone doing the actual job, whether it's reporting or play-by-play, and there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And as you said, what you're doing here with the podcast, create your own content and be serious about it and enjoy the process. Overall, though, yeah, you got to really you have to be prepared, but you also have to kind of let eventually your personality. And I'm not talking about turning into having any shtick or anything, but you have to kind of separate yourself a little bit from everybody else who has a podcast or who does interviews. And is it direct questions? Is it a little humor? Is it whatever it is in whatever field? And hopefully you'll latch on somewhere in an area that you like. But I will say there are great opportunities at all different layers, whether it's through social media, YouTube channel, Instagram, the X, whatever you want. It really is wide open, and so there are a lot more opportunities. But there's more people too that are able to kind of refine their skills, and it's always been a competitive business. It's even more so now.
Yeah, totally true. Chris, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you very much for spending some time. Can you let our audience know where they can find you on social media, any other projects you're working on, or anything else our audience should be aware of?
Yeah, well, I'm Chris Myers Sports. It's MYERS. ChrisMyersSports.com is a website. There's a lot of old interviews and also current information with the NFL and some other sports that we put on there, including photos and once in a while videos. I am on it's _Chris Myers on X, Twitter. And it's Chris Myers Fox, or just Chris Myers Fox at that's my Instagram handle there. That a lot of pictures on IG. But for the book, obviously HarperCollins, Amazon, you could order it. That deserves a wow. The audiobook, Justin, is also, I had to do my own voice. That was kind of interesting, going back over it to read things and then remember and recall certain stories and in college football and things like that. So that's available too wherever books are sold. And I hope people are moved by it and inspired by it, because whether you're in the business or want to be in the business or just a sports fan or like certain kinds of big personalities in sports, like Bill Murray, who wrote the foreword, who's not really a sportscaster but is a lover of sports and an entertainer, and then people like Charles Barkley, Tom Brady, etc.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Justin. Good luck.